For a second, I thought she was joking. The paper felt rough between my fingers, the kind that comes from a cheap printer. I could still smell the faint scent of the ink, fresh, sharp, as if someone had just pressed print moments before I arrived. Her eyes didn't blink, her lips didn't tremble. She just said, "You should think about what's best for the child." I remember standing there in her living room, clutching that paper, hearing the ticking of her grandfather clock behind me. I was 5 weeks pregnant. My hands were shaking, not from hormones, but from disbelief. My husband, Aaron, sat silently beside her, staring down at the floor. I kept waiting for him to laugh, to say, "Mom, that's insane." But he didn't. He didn't say a word. That was the moment something inside me cracked, a tiny hairline fracture of trust. I didn't know it yet, but that fracture would grow until it split our family wide open. Back then, life felt full and soft. The kind of days where you could taste hope in your morning coffee. Aaron and I had been married for 3 years. We lived in a small brick house on Maple Street, with a tiny front yard where I planted lavender and rosemary. Every evening, I'd sit on the porch after work, my hands smelling like herbs and dish soap, waiting to hear his car pull into the driveway. We were trying for a baby for almost a year. When the test finally turned positive, I cried so hard I couldn't even say the words. I just handed him the stick, and he laughed through tears. He lifted me up in his arms, spinning me around, whispering, "You're going to be a mom." For those first few days, I felt like I was floating. I started journaling names, humming lullabies without realizing it. I'd rest my hand over my stomach as if I could already feel the heartbeat inside. When I called Aaron's mother, Mrs. Whitmore, to tell her the news, she said, "Come over tomorrow. We need to talk." Her tone wasn't excited, not even warm. It was official, like she was summoning me for a meeting, but I told myself not to take it personally. She'd always been formal, the kind of woman who hosted dinners with silver napkin rings and polished candlesticks, who never wore slippers even in her own house. Aaron used to say she was just particular, but deep down, I knew there was more to it. When I arrived the next morning, she was already seated at the dining table. The smell of lemon polish filled the air. On the table was a single envelope, cream-colored, unsealed, waiting. I smiled and said, "Good morning, Mom," trying to sound cheerful. She didn't answer, just nodded toward the chair across from her. Aaron sat beside her, his hands clasped, his jaw tight. And then she slid the paper toward me. "Read it," she said. I opened it, expecting maybe a doctor's recommendation, some kind of prenatal advice, but the title at the top read. I laughed at first, it burst out of me awkwardly, like a hiccup. "What is this?" She folded her hands neatly and said, "It's an option. For your own good." "My own good?" I repeated, staring at her. "I just told you I'm pregnant. I thought you'd be happy." She sighed, slow and deliberate, the kind of sigh people give when they believe they're wiser than you. "My son's future, and the future of this family, is not something to take lightly. We must be careful who carries our bloodline." The words hung heavy between us. Aaron looked up briefly, his eyes flicking between us, but he didn't speak. My throat burned. "What are you talking about?" She leaned forward slightly. "I warned Aaron before he married you. Your family has no history, no records. We don't know where your people come from. That matters." That word, your people, hit me like a slap. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The clock ticked louder. Somewhere in the kitchen, a kettle began to hiss. "You're saying I'm not good enough to have this baby?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice was calm, cold. "I'm saying this child deserves to come from a woman whose lineage we can be proud of. Someone like..." She stopped herself, but I knew who she meant. Aaron's ex-fiancée, Claire. The one his mother still invited to family functions after our wedding. The one she once called her real daughter. I pushed the paper back across the table. My hands were trembling, but my voice came out steady. "I'm keeping my baby." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might actually smile, but not kindly. "We'll see," she said. That night, Aaron and I didn't talk. He came home late, muttered something about being tired, and went straight to bed. I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. The moonlight cut across the room, catching on the edge of the photo frame above our dresser, our wedding picture. His mother had insisted on standing between us in that photo. I used to think it was funny. Now it just felt symbolic. Over the next week, she didn't call. Neither did he. The silence was thick, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that makes you doubt your own worth. I told myself I'd focus on the baby. On our little family. But something had shifted. When Aaron looked at me, I didn't see the same softness. It was as if his mother's voice had crawled into his thoughts and started whispering things I couldn't hear. He started coming home later. Said work was busy. He stopped asking about baby names. Stopped touching my stomach. And every night, I would whisper to the tiny life inside me, "You are wanted. You are loved." But deep down, I felt a shadow growing, something I couldn't yet name. The first clue that something was wrong came one quiet Thursday evening. I was folding laundry in the living room, the scent of lavender detergent filling the air, when Aaron's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He was in the shower. Normally, I never touched his phone. But the screen lit up with a message preview that made my chest tighten. It read, "She's already agreed to it. You just need to sign." No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind racing. Agreed to what? I whispered to myself. When Aaron came out of the shower, towel around his waist, humming lightly, I forced myself to stay calm. "Hey," I said, folding another towel. "Someone texted you." He froze for just a second, just long enough for me to notice. "Who?" I didn't check. He nodded, grabbed the phone, and turned away from me. His thumbs moved quickly. I waited for him to look at me, to explain. But he didn't. He just slipped the phone into his pocket and said, "Work stuff." Work stuff. At 9 at night. With no name attached. I smiled weakly, pretending to believe him. But my stomach felt hollow. That weekend, I went to visit my mother, the one person who always made me feel grounded. She lived in a small apartment across town, filled with mismatched furniture and the smell of jasmine tea. When I told her what happened with Aaron's mother, she pressed her lips together, her eyes full of quiet anger. "Child," she said softly, "people like that, they wear their cruelty like pearls. Polished, but poisonous." I smiled sadly. "You think I should confront her again?" She shook her head. "Not yet. You protect your peace first. That baby inside you needs calm, not war." I nodded, but as I looked out her window, watching the city lights flicker, I felt something stirring inside me. It wasn't just sadness. It was a kind of defiance. I waited for him to look at me, to explain. But he didn't. He just slipped the phone into his pocket and said, "Work stuff." Work stuff. At 9 at night. With no name attached. I smiled weakly, pretending to believe him. But my stomach felt hollow. That weekend, I went to visit my mother, the one person who always made me feel grounded. She lived in a small apartment across town, filled with mismatched furniture and the smell of jasmine tea. When I told her what happened with Aaron's mother, she pressed her lips together, her eyes full of quiet anger. "Child," she said softly, "people like that, they wear their cruelty like pearls. Polished, but poisonous." I smiled sadly. "You think I should confront her again?" She shook her head. "Not yet. You protect your peace first. That baby inside you needs calm, not war." I nodded, but as I looked out her window, watching the city lights flicker, I felt something stirring inside me. It wasn't just sadness. It was a kind of defiance. When I returned home, the air felt colder, like someone had opened a window and let winter in. Aaron was in the dining room, hunched over paperwork. I walked closer and caught sight of a familiar heading on one of the pages. He quickly covered it with his hand. "What's that?" I asked. He looked up, startled. "Just something Mom needed." "For what?" He hesitated. "Insurance." But there was a flicker in his eyes, the same flicker people get when they're half telling the truth. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the clock ticking, every sound seemed louder in the silence that followed. Insurance doesn't ask for my side of the family's medical history, I said quietly. He didn't answer. That night, I cried quietly in the bathroom, turning on the faucet to hide the sound. Days turned into weeks. My belly began to show, small and round, proof of the life growing inside me. But with every inch my body changed, Aaron grew more distant. One morning, as I packed his lunch, I noticed he was dressed a little too neatly, cologne, new tie, the kind of detail he used to save for date nights. Big meeting? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Something like that, he said, not looking at me. After he left, I decided to clean the house, something to keep my mind from spiraling. In the process, I found a white envelope tucked inside his desk drawer. My name wasn't on it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were several documents, some printed emails, others handwritten notes. And right at the top, I saw a familiar signature, Margaret Whitmore. Aaron's mother. The first line of the email made my hands go numb. The agency has confirmed that once the paperwork is signed, she won't be able to contest the adoption. Everything will go through privately. I reread it again and again, hoping I was misunderstanding. But the words were clear. She won't be able to contest the adoption. They were talking about me. About my baby. I sank onto the floor, clutching the paper against my chest, shaking. My own husband, the man who held me as I cried with joy over our pregnancy, was working with his mother to take my child away from me. When Aaron came home that evening, I was sitting on the couch, the papers laid neatly in front of me. He froze in the doorway. "Where did you find those?" he asked, his voice low. "In your drawer," I said. "Next to our wedding album." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "You shouldn't have gone through my things." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "You're planning to take my baby, and that's your concern?" He rubbed his temples. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded. "What could possibly make you believe this is right?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained, almost apologetic. "My mother thinks," he stopped, swallowed. "She thinks your family background could affect the child's chances." I repeated, stunned. "You mean bloodline?" He didn't deny it. "You actually believe that garbage?" I whispered. He looked down. "I just want what's best for the baby." Tears filled my eyes. "No, Aaron. You want what's best for your mother." That night, I packed a small bag. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely zip it. I didn't know where I'd go, maybe to my mother's, maybe to a friend's couch, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house another night. When I stepped out into the cold night air, I looked back at the home we'd built together. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow across the yard. But all I could feel was the chill of betrayal. As I drove away, the baby kicked for the first time. A tiny flutter, soft and insistent. I pressed my hand to my belly and whispered, "I'm here. I won't let anyone take you from me." I spent that first night at my mother's apartment, curled up on her couch under an old quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and rosewater. The city outside her window hummed with life, car horns, laughter, sirens, but inside, it was quiet. Safe. When she saw my face the next morning, swollen from crying, she didn't ask right away. She just brought me tea, chamomile with honey, and sat beside me, her hand resting gently on my back. After a while, she said softly, "He's still his mother's boy, isn't he?" I nodded. The words wouldn't come, but the tears did. My mother sighed, long and deep. "That woman has been trying to erase you since the day you married him. But you listen to me, baby, nobody can erase a mother from her child." Her words sank into me like a quiet strength. Still, I couldn't shake the ache of betrayal. A few days later, Aaron came by. He didn't call first, just showed up, standing outside my mother's door in his work clothes, holding a bouquet of lilies. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped outside, closing the door behind me. He looked exhausted, eyes rimmed red, voice unsteady. I never meant for it to go that far. You mean you never meant for me to find out, I said quietly. He looked away. Mom said it was just a precaution. That we were setting things up in case. In case what? I cut in. In case I was an unfit mother? In case I didn't fit into your perfect little bloodline? His face twisted. You're twisting this. No, Aaron, I said, my voice trembling but firm. You and your mother were planning to sign away my child without me. There's no twisting that. He stepped closer. I was scared, okay? She made it sound like you might not handle the pregnancy well, with your anxiety and... Don't you dare, I snapped. Don't you turn my emotions into ammunition for your guilt. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy with years of trust turning into dust. Finally, I said, you need to leave. He stared at me, like he was trying to recognize the woman in front of him, then nodded slowly. You're making a mistake. I watched him walk down the hallway, his shoulders slumped. When the door clicked shut, I sank to the floor and cried until there were no tears left. The next few weeks were a blur. I stayed with my mother, started seeing a prenatal counselor, and tried to keep my focus on the baby. Every kick reminded me why I had to stay strong. But Mrs. Whitmore didn't stop. She started calling. At first, it was subtle, polite messages asking for updates, pretending concern. Then they turned colder. One voicemail still echoes in my mind. You're making things harder for everyone, dear. This child deserves a proper future. Don't let pride ruin that. I deleted it, but her voice stayed with me, smooth, composed, dripping with control. One morning, my mother came into the kitchen holding the mail. There's something for you, she said cautiously. It was an envelope with Whitmore and Associates printed at the top. A law firm. Inside was a petition for pre-adoptive guardianship. I felt the air leave my lungs. They had actually filed paperwork. My mother gripped my hand tightly. You're not signing anything, she said. We'll find a lawyer. But that wasn't enough for me anymore. I needed them to see me, to look me in the eye and know I wouldn't be erased. So that afternoon, I drove to their house. The Whitmore estate was as pristine as ever, manicured lawns, white pillars, a front door that looked like it had never been touched by real life. Mrs. Whitmore opened the door herself, her face calm, almost expectant. Ah, she said, as if I'd arrived for tea. I was wondering when you'd come. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. You filed adoption papers. Her lips curved into a polite smile. You left your husband. Someone has to ensure the child's future. You mean your version of the future, I said, my voice shaking. She gestured toward the living room. Sit. Let's talk like civilized women. I didn't sit. You think I'm unworthy because of where I come from. Because my family doesn't have money, or a last name that sounds important. But I will not let you use that to steal my child. Her eyes hardened. You think love alone will raise a child? You can barely support yourself. My anger flared. Maybe not with your kind of wealth. But with something your son and you have clearly forgotten, decency. For the first time, I saw her composure falter. Just a flicker. She said quietly, you don't understand the pressure this family carries. Aaron is my only child. Our lineage. I cut her off. Your lineage is built on fear, not pride. Her hand trembled slightly, the first crack in her porcelain mask. I leaned in, lowering my voice. You can buy lawyers. You can buy influence. But you cannot buy my motherhood. For a moment, silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint hum of her grandfather clock, the same one I heard that day she handed me the adoption form. Then I turned to leave. As I reached the door, she said softly, you'll regret this, dear. I looked back. Maybe. But at least the regret will be mine. And I walked out. By the time I got back home, I felt drained but strangely lighter, like I'd finally stepped out of a shadow. That night, Aaron called again. He sounded lost, his words slurring slightly, maybe from whiskey, maybe from guilt. "I didn't mean for things to go this far," he said. "Mom she gets in my head." I sighed. "Aaron, she's been living in your head since before we met. I just didn't realize she rented the whole place." He chuckled weakly, then his tone softened. "I still love you, you know." For the first time, I didn't say it back. A month later, I filed for legal custody, preemptively, to protect my child before birth. My lawyer said it was rare but possible given the circumstances. Word got around the family quickly. Suddenly, I was the ungrateful wife who turned against the Whitmores. But I didn't care. Every night, as I rubbed my growing belly, I whispered, "We're almost there. Mama's got you." The world might have doubted me, but this child, this heartbeat inside me, was mine. And I would fight for them with everything I had. The day I filed for full custody, I remember feeling both terrified and free. The courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper, a mix of old secrets and new beginnings. My lawyer, a kind woman named Denise, held my hand before we went in. "Once this is done," she said gently, "they won't be able to touch you or your baby." Touch me. That's what this whole thing had been about: control, ownership, bloodlines. They wanted to touch every part of my life, shape it, define it, stamp it with their approval. But not anymore. Denise was right. This was the day I took myself back. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, hearings, and whispered gossip from family members who only ever saw the Whitmore's version of events. Aaron didn't show up to the first hearing. He sent his lawyer instead. I sat across from that man in a small courtroom, his suit pressed, his tone polite but sharp. He presented documents that made me sound unstable, emotionally delicate, financially insecure. But Denise had prepared me. She slid a folder across the table filled with my employment records, prenatal checkups, and, most importantly, a copy of the adoption petition I'd found. The judge's eyes darkened as he read it. When the lawyer tried to claim it was never filed, Denise calmly pointed out the official timestamp on the back page. Silence filled the room. For the first time, the law was on my side. That night, I went home and sat on my bed, my hands resting on my stomach. The baby kicked, stronger now, rhythmic, determined. "See?" I whispered. "We're doing this." But even in that small victory, I knew the battle wasn't over. Mrs. Whitmore wasn't the type to back down. A week later, she called again, this time from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Hello?" Her voice came through soft and cold. "You made quite the spectacle in court." "I made a statement," I said. "You humiliated my son." "Your son humiliated himself," I replied. "He tried to take something that wasn't his." There was a pause. I could hear her exhale, slow, deliberate. "You think you've won, but I raised Aaron. He'll come back to reason eventually. You'll see." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But by then, he'll be too late." I hung up before she could respond. It felt like the first time I'd hung up on her, and the silence that followed was glorious. The months rolled on. My belly grew, my energy waned, and I found strength in small routines. My mother would come over every morning with breakfast, oatmeal with cinnamon, herbal tea, a gentle kiss on my forehead. Sometimes, I'd find her humming as she folded baby clothes, whispering prayers under her breath. "You're gonna be just fine," she'd say. "This baby's got a strong mama." But as the due date approached, anxiety crept in again. I still hadn't heard from Aaron. Not a visit, not a message. Just silence. Part of me hoped he'd show up, apologize, be the man I married. Another part of me prayed he'd stay away. Both wishes broke my heart. One rainy afternoon, about 2 weeks before my due date, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Aaron was standing there, drenched, pale, holding something in his hands. A small box. "Can I come in?" he asked. My mother was napping, so I stepped aside wordlessly. He looked around the apartment, his gaze lingering on the baby crib near the window. "It's smaller than I expected," he said softly. I folded my arms. "We don't all live in mansions." He winced. "I deserved that." Then he opened the box. Inside was a tiny silver rattle, engraved with the name Whitmore. "Mom wanted me to bring this," he said quietly. I stared at it for a long time. "Why? So the baby knows who they belong to?" He shook his head. "She doesn't get to claim that anymore." I blinked, not sure I'd heard him right. He sat down, rubbing his hands together. "I told her I'm done. With all of it. The pressure, the control. I realized I'd been living my whole life for her approval, not mine. Not yours." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But trust isn't something you can rebuild with apologies. "I can't just forget what you did," I said softly. "I know." His voice cracked. "I'm not asking you to. I want to be there when the baby comes. Even if you don't want me in your life." Tears welled in my eyes. "Why now, Aaron? Why after all this?" He looked up, eyes full of guilt. "Because I saw the adoption papers in her drawer again last week. Signed. Dated. She was planning to file them behind my back this time. It hit me, she never wanted me to have a child either. Just control over whoever did." The truth of it settled like a stone between us. Mrs. Whitmore's obsession wasn't just about bloodline, it was about power. And Aaron had been her puppet for years. I exhaled slowly. "If you really mean what you say, then prove it. Protect your child. Not your mother." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I will." When he left that night, I didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. But something in his voice, the tremor, the regret, told me maybe he'd finally broken free. Still, I wasn't naive enough to think his mother would stop. 2 days later, I received a letter. No return address, just my name in elegant handwriting. Inside was a single note. "You can't hide forever. Family always finds its way home." I folded it carefully and tucked it away in a drawer, not out of fear, but as a reminder of what I'd overcome. When labor finally came, it wasn't graceful like the movies. It was long, messy, and loud. Aaron showed up halfway through, out of breath, holding my hand, whispering, I'm here. And for those hours, I let him be. Not the husband who betrayed me, not the son of a controlling woman, just the father of my child. When I heard that first cry, everything else melted away. They placed the baby, a tiny, wrinkled miracle, on my chest. My heart swelled with a love so fierce it scared me. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, Welcome home, little one. Mom is here. Aaron cried too. For the first time, they weren't tears of guilt, but of something pure. In that hospital room, surrounded by the scent of antiseptic and new beginnings, I realized something profound. Family isn't defined by names or bloodlines. It's built by those who choose to stay, who choose to love. And for the first time in months, I knew. This was my family. Built on my terms. For weeks, I felt the house was filled with ghosts. Not the kind that rattled chains, but the kind that lingered in the way people avoided each other's eyes. The smell of lavender from the guest room still clung to the curtains, even though Margaret had gone back to her own home. She hadn't called me once. And when she called Daniel, I could always tell. His voice would drop to a whisper, and he'd retreat to the garage to talk, as if the truth needed to stay locked away with the smell of motor oil and old boxes. But secrets don't stay buried for long. Especially not in families like ours. It began with Sunday dinner at my sister-in-law, Carla's, house. Carla was Daniel's older sister, the golden child, the one Margaret had always bragged about. I hadn't wanted to go, but Daniel insisted. It's just dinner, he said. Let's show them we're doing fine. I didn't want to show anything. But I went, for him, for the sake of pretending we were still whole. When we arrived, the smell of roast beef filled the air, and Carla greeted us with that practiced smile she wore like a badge of family unity. "Oh, you made it," she said, hugging Daniel tightly. Then, with less warmth, she added, "And you too, Lily." I smiled politely. It was the kind of smile you wear when your heart is sore. As we sat around the long oak table, conversation flowed easily, until Carla's husband mentioned something offhand that made my blood run cold. He said, "Margaret was over the other day, showing me some paperwork she was upset about." Something to do with adoption? The word hit the room like a plate shattering. Daniel froze. Carla blinked. And me? I just sat there, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Carla turned toward me. Adoption? What was that about? Daniel opened his mouth, but I spoke first. Ask your mother, I said softly. She's the one who handed me the form. The silence that followed was sharp and electric. You could almost feel the air thicken with discomfort. Carla frowned. What are you talking about? So I told them. I told them everything, how Margaret had handed me an adoption form instead of congratulations. How she'd said she didn't want my child carrying the family name. How she believed Daniel's bloodline needed to continue through someone else. I tried to speak calmly, but emotion trembled through my voice. By the time I finished, Carla's husband had put down his fork. Carla looked horrified. And Daniel, my husband, had his face buried in his hands. Oh my God, Carla whispered. She actually did that? Daniel muttered something I could barely hear. I told her to stop. I told her she was wrong. Then why didn't you stop her? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me then, eyes wet. Because she's my mother. And I thought if I ignored it, it would just go away. Carla shook her head. That's not how Mom works. Then she turned to me, and for the first time, her tone softened. Lily, I'm so sorry. I didn't know she went that far. I nodded, too tired to be angry. It's not your apology I need. Word spread fast after that. Within days, Daniel's cousins were calling, asking questions. Even Margaret's church friends started whispering. The story twisted through every mouth that carried it, from she offered her daughter-in-law an adoption form to she tried to take the baby. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. Margaret called the house one evening. Her voice trembled with a mix of anger and desperation. You've humiliated me, she said. You've made me a laughingstock. I didn't make you anything, I replied quietly. You did that yourself. You don't understand, she hissed. You don't understand what it's like to watch your family name disappear, to watch everything your ancestors built be carried by strangers. Your son's child isn't a stranger, I said. He's your grandchild. There was silence on the line. Then a shaky breath. You've turned him against me, she whispered. I didn't answer. Because, truthfully, I hadn't. She had done that on her own. After that night, Daniel stopped visiting her. He said he needed time to figure things out, but I knew he was finally seeing the woman behind the mask. The one who had wrapped her love in control. Still, it hurt him. I'd wake up at night to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark, his shoulders slumped. Do you ever think people can change? He asked one night. I think people can learn, I said softly. But only if they really want to. He nodded slowly, eyes wet. I just don't know if she ever will. I reached out and took his hand. Then we'll protect our peace, Daniel. Even if that means keeping our distance. When our son was born, a healthy boy with his father's deep brown eyes, we named him Eli. Daniel cried the first time he held him. And for the first time in months, I saw something pure on his face, not guilt, not fear, just love. We didn't call Margaret right away. But she came anyway, a week later, unannounced. I remember the moment she stepped into the doorway. She looked older, smaller. Her eyes softened when she saw Eli in my arms. For a long time, she just stood there, silent, trembling. Then she whispered, "He looks like my father." I didn't speak. And neither did Daniel. She took a hesitant step forward. "May I hold him?" I looked at Daniel. He nodded faintly. So I handed her my son, the same woman who once wanted him gone. As she cradled him, tears rolled down her cheeks. "I was wrong," she whispered. "So wrong." And though part of me wanted to pull away, another part, the tired, human part, just watched her and thought, maybe this is what healing begins to look like. It's strange how silence can carry both peace and pain. After months of chaos, the quiet in our home felt almost holy. No more slammed doors, no raised voices, just the soft rhythm of Eli's breathing as he slept against my chest. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in the rocking chair by the window, the moonlight spilling across his tiny hands. I'd think about everything that had happened, the shock, the anger, the grief, and realize that somehow, through all of it, I had become stronger than I ever intended to be. Margaret called often now. Not to control, not to interfere, but to listen. She would ask about Eli's feeding schedule, the color of his eyes, the shape of his smile. She never gave advice anymore. She simply said, "Tell me about my grandson." There was a gentleness in her voice that hadn't been there before, a breaking down of pride that felt almost sacred. And though I hadn't forgotten, I found myself forgiving. Not because she deserved it, but because I needed it. One morning, when Eli was about 6 months old, Margaret asked if she could visit again. Daniel hesitated, but I said yes. I don't know why, maybe because I wanted to see if her words matched her heart. She arrived quietly, carrying a small box wrapped in pale blue paper. "I brought something," she said, her voice trembling. Inside was a photo, old, sepia-toned, of a young woman in a white dress holding a baby. "This was your husband's great-grandmother," Margaret said softly. "She was the first woman in our family to own her own business. People used to call her stubborn, but she said she was just sure." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "You remind me of her." For a long moment, I didn't speak. The old Margaret, the one who'd handed me an adoption form, would have never said those words. But this new version of her, she was softer, smaller, maybe finally human. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That means more than you know." She reached out and touched Eli's cheek. "I was so afraid of losing my place in this family," she whispered. "But I see now, love doesn't take away. It multiplies." I felt something in me ease, like an old knot finally coming undone. Later that day, when she left, Daniel stood by the window watching her drive away. "I can't believe she's changing," he said. "She's trying," I replied. "And sometimes that's enough." He turned to me, eyes full of emotion. "You saved us, Lily. You held us together when I couldn't." I smiled, tired but proud. "We held each other, Daniel. That's what families are supposed to do, not control or demand, but hold." Months passed. Eli began to crawl, to laugh, to turn our once quiet house into something alive. And with every small sound, every giggle, every cry, I felt a piece of my old pain dissolve. We started inviting Margaret over for Sunday lunches again. The first time she offered to help in the kitchen, I expected tension. But instead, she just rolled up her sleeves and said, "Tell me what to do, Lily." It was such a simple sentence. But it carried years of humility in it. As we cooked together, I realized how much had changed. She no longer gave orders. She asked. She no longer looked for mistakes. She listened. And though she still had moments of old stubbornness, there was warmth now, the kind that comes when someone finally learns they can love without control. One afternoon, we were sitting outside under the shade of the old maple tree. Margaret held Eli in her lap while I folded laundry nearby. She looked at me suddenly and said, "You know, When you told me you were pregnant, I thought I was protecting my family. I didn't see that I was destroying it." Her voice cracked a little. "I thought lineage meant blood. I didn't realize it means love." I looked at her, this woman who had once been my greatest enemy, and felt an ache in my chest. Because for the first time I believed her. "Thank you for saying that," I whispered. She smiled sadly. "Thank you for giving me a second chance. Sometimes healing doesn't come like a sunrise. It comes like a candle, small, steady, one flicker at a time." That's how it was for us. Each day, a new light, a new softness. Daniel started spending more time at home, more laughter in his voice. Margaret became Nana instead of mother-in-law. And I, somehow, became the glue, not by being perfect, but by refusing to let bitterness have the final word. Now, when I think back to that day, the adoption form, her cold expression, my shaking hands, it feels like a different lifetime. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that pain can be a strange kind of teacher. It doesn't ask permission. It just arrives, breaks you open, and forces you to grow roots where you thought you'd wither. And as I watch Eli toddle across the floor, his laughter filling every corner of our home, I realize something. That day, I didn't lose a family. I rebuilt one. Not on tradition. Not on fear. But on love, the kind that doesn't need to be pure by blood, only true by heart. When people ask me now if I ever truly forgave Margaret, I tell them this. Forgiveness isn't a door you walk through once. It's a hallway you keep walking down, every single day, choosing not to turn back. And I keep walking. For my husband. For my son. For the woman I used to be, the one who refused to sign her child away. Sometimes I still think about that day, the day I stood in my mother-in-law's living room, one hand resting on my belly, the other trembling around a piece of paper that was supposed to erase my child. I remember the coldness in her eyes, the silence that hung between us like a blade, and the way my heart sank, realizing that joy could be stolen so quickly. But I also remember what came after, the nights I rocked my son to sleep, whispering promises that no one would ever decide his worth for him. The mornings Daniel and I rebuilt trust, word by word. The moment Margaret finally said, "I was wrong." See, I used to think family was something you inherited, that it came pre-written, with rules and hierarchies and bloodlines that could never be challenged. But now I know better. Family isn't written in your last name. It's written in the way you stay, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. It's written in the way you choose love over pride, peace over control. Margaret and I will never be the same as we were before. But maybe that's a good thing. Some relationships aren't meant to stay untouched, they're meant to be remade, stronger, softer, wiser. I look at my son now, chasing bubbles in the backyard, his laughter echoing against the sky, and I think, maybe that's the whole point of all this. To break, to rebuild, and to teach the next generation that love should never have conditions attached. If you're listening to this and you've ever been told you weren't enough for someone's idea of family, I want you to remember. You are allowed to redefine what family means. You are allowed to draw your own circle and fill it with people who choose you back. Because sometimes, the people who start as strangers end up saving your heart. And the ones who share your blood still have to earn your trust. So tell me, what would you have done if someone handed you that paper? Would you have walked away, or would you have stood your ground? Let me know in the comments, my friends. And if you've ever found strength in the middle of heartbreak, share this story, because someone out there needs to be reminded that their love, their motherhood, their voice still matters. Until next time. Take care of your heart, and remember, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over and over again.